I wasn't supposed to find this. It was never listed in the archive index, not in the county registrar, and certainly not in the sanitized university databases I'd been combing through. It began with a misfiled box, wedged behind a warped cabinet in the sub-basement of Culpeper County Hall. I had gone down there looking for old zoning records, something routine, forgettable. Instead, I found the kind of silence that presses against your ribs, thick with dust and humidity, the smell of wet wood and paper slowly decomposing into mulch. The box was black. Not cardboard, not plastic, something in between. It resisted my grip as if it hadn't been touched in decades. When I lifted the lid, a sour, iron smell spilled out. Inside were water-swollen ledgers, each one warped into grotesque curves. Pages stuck together like layers of dead skin. Someone, decades ago, had tried to preserve them, but the mold had won. Still, among the illegible rot, a name reappeared, ink stubborn against time, Culpeper. It wasn't surprising at first, this was, after all, Culpeper County, but the handwriting was never the same. Different hands. Different decades. Yet always that surname. Beneath the ledgers, tucked inside a sealed envelope stiff as bark, I found something stranger, a folded photograph. It had been cut to fit, its edges jagged. Two boys stared at me from the sepia blur, twins, no more than 12. Their posture was stiff, almost militaristic, but their eyes were wrong. One looked directly at the camera with unsettling certainty, the other stared just past it, not unfocused, but as if he were watching something move in the room with me. Scrawled in ink across the back, "The doctrine holds." I should have stopped. I should have slid the photo back where it belonged and resealed the box. But the air had changed around me. The low hum of the fluorescent light seemed to deepen, like a throat clearing in the shadows. I kept digging. There were notes, official ones, typed on county letterhead, about an unregistered structure, condemned in 1932. Its location was blacked out, over and over, but someone had pressed so hard with the typewriter that the grooves sank through the paper. I could just make out the numbers, 12 to 12. The repetition gnawed at me. Culpeper Twins. Doctrine. 12 to 12, I tried to laugh it off, the way you do when your nerves catch fire and your mind insists there's no pattern. But my fingers trembled when I held those papers, and the air in that basement seemed to carry a low pulse, like a heartbeat beneath the concrete. By the time I closed the box, I was sweating despite the cool damp. My chest felt hollowed out, like something had already been taken from me just by touching those pages. And yet, curiosity is an infection. The kind that convinces you you're in control while it rewrites everything inside you. I signed out of the archive without a word to the clerk. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the keys on the counter. As I stepped into the brightness of late afternoon, the world outside felt thinner, artificial. Every sound, the cicadas, the cars, the voices, felt like a performance for my benefit. I know now that what I carried home that day was more than paper. It was a summons. And something in me, against my better judgment, had already answered. The deeper I searched, the less the Culpeper name felt like coincidence. It wasn't just family records scattered across the county ledgers. It was a network, deliberately obscured, yet always resurfacing in the margins of official history. The breakthrough came 2 nights later, when I found a microfilmed copy of a state health report from 1903. It mentioned a place I'd never heard of, St. Isidore's Home for the Advancement of Youth. Officially, it had been founded as a boarding school, chartered under the Department of Public Instruction and partially funded by the diocese. It was described as a model institution for rural education, a place where disadvantaged children could be reshaped into disciplined citizens. The language was paternal, almost self-congratulatory. The director, Reverend Dr. Elias Calder, was praised for his moral clarity and innovative methods. But the records blurred after 1911. There were no graduation lists, no alumni accounts, no student transfer records. The name appeared on budgets and legislative appropriations until 1938, and then, nothing. The building itself was never demolished, never repurposed. It simply slipped off the map, like a town swallowed whole. I drove out the next morning. The coordinates listed in the 1903 report led me down a dirt road outside Brandy Station, where the woods pressed close against rusting barbed wire. Through the trees, I glimpsed it, a brick structure, Georgian in style, its roof sagging under decades of neglect. The windows were boarded, but graffiti had been scrawled across the planks. Beneath the spray paint, faintly carved into the wood, were those same numbers, 12 to 12. Back at the library, I combed through more reels of microfilm. I found a transcript of a lecture Calder delivered at a regional education conference in 1909. His voice, even through the formal typewritten summary, bled with conviction. The child is not a vessel to be filled but a doctrine to be perfected. What is imperfect may be corrected. What resists correction may be broken. That phrase, the doctrine to be perfected, made my stomach knot. It wasn't the rhetoric of a teacher. It was the manifesto of a sculptor wielding a hammer. The more I read, the more inconsistencies gnawed at me. Enrollment forms listed dozens of children every year, orphans, mostly, collected from across Virginia and beyond. But census records never accounted for them afterward. The state's population figures carried no trace of their existence. It was as if every child who entered St. Isidore's disappeared into a ledger that only Calder controlled. Then came the inspection report from 1924. A team of state officials had attempted an audit. Their notes were brief, curt, clearly censored before public filing. Only a few sentences remained legible: dormitories locked at all times. No pupils visible during daylight hours. Director refused entry citing spiritual discipline. The last line was underlined 3 times: this institution is not operating as represented. And yet, the funding continued for 14 more years. What unsettled me most wasn't just the silence in the records, but the tone of admiration that persisted long after evidence suggested something darker. Calder was later described in diocesan bulletins as a visionary of youth reclamation, his photograph appearing beside campaigns for Catholic charities. In every image, he was immaculate, tall, severe, his eyes lit with that unsettling confidence I'd seen in the boy from the photograph. I closed the files with a shaking hand. The official narrative was immaculate, an enlightened project, a man of principle, a community uplifted. But beneath the varnish lay decades of vanished children, paper trails deliberately erased, and an institution that had been allowed to collapse quietly into the woods. And as much as I wanted to tell myself I discovered only bureaucratic neglect, I couldn't shake the certainty that the doctrine Calder preached had survived long past his institution. That someone, somewhere, had carried it forward. The hardest thing to describe is the silence of missing names. It's not just absence, it's an active wound, a tearing away of something that should never be gone. When I began tracing St. Isidore's supposed alumni, I found nothing but gaps. A student roster from 1910 listed 42 children admitted that year. By 1912, not a single one appeared in local census data, marriage records, or death registries. They didn't die young, they didn't move away. They simply ceased to exist in the public record. I kept looking. In an attic collection donated to the county library, I uncovered letters, fragile, moth-eaten, folded into envelopes with no stamps. They had never been mailed. Each bore a different child's handwriting, but the words were almost identical: I am well. The food is good. I am learning discipline. Father Calder says we must be perfected. Every page ended with the same strange refrain, written in different hands but with the same rhythm: my name is not mine, but his. It was as though their individuality had been drained and replaced with Calder's script, like ink blotting over their very selves. The deeper I read, the more I began to notice erasures even in physical form. On the walls of the collapsed West Wing, photographs taken by a county surveyor in 1972, I saw names carved into plaster, etched with nails or broken glass. At first the scrawls were distinct: Mary, Thomas, Ruth. But beside each one, a second layer of scratching obliterated the letters, scored over until nothing was left but gouges. Someone wanted to remember. Someone else wanted to make sure they didn't. Then there were the portraits. In the county museum's back archive, tucked behind agricultural exhibits, I found a collection labeled "Donated by Diocese, 1940s." Black and white photographs of children in neat rows. At first glance they were ordinary class portraits. But as I examined them one by one, I realized something was wrong. The faces blurred together. Different children, different ages, yet the expressions were eerily uniform: blank, lips pressed thin, eyes staring straight ahead without light. Even the posture was identical, as though their bodies had been arranged by the same invisible hand. No names were written on the backs, only numbers. And then I found him. Buried in the personnel records of the diocese was the name Brother Matthias Keene. He was listed as an assistant to Calder between 1907 and 1915. Unlike Calder, his presence wasn't celebrated, his name appeared only in payroll ledgers and duty rosters. But in a brittle journal tucked in the same file, I caught a glimpse of something more human. His entries were terse at first: weather reports, meal counts, but then, in 1912, the handwriting faltered: the children do not call themselves anymore. They wait until they are called, and only answer to the name given. I asked one boy his birthday. He stared at me as though I'd spoken nonsense. He said, "Father has not told me when I was born." One entry shook me to the core: they carve their names into the stone steps at night. By morning, someone has gone behind and scraped them out. I hear weeping, but never find the source. Matthias never wrote again after 1915. His employment ended abruptly. No obituary, no trace. Another erased. I sat with that journal in my lap, trembling. The systemic erasure was not only bureaucratic but spiritual, a complete stripping away of identity until a child became an echo of Calder's doctrine. Even in the written word, individuality was overwritten, folded into a collective script that erased itself. And I couldn't escape the thought that those same patterns, vanishing names, blurred portraits, scripted voices, were not entirely confined to history. The silence I felt in the archives was not dead. It was rehearsed. I shouldn't have gone inside. Every instinct screamed against it, but the woods around St. Isidore's pressed too close, the air too still, as though the trees themselves expected me to enter. The front door was bolted, so I slipped through a broken basement window. The smell hit first: wet stone, mildew, the metallic tang of rusted pipes. My flashlight beam sliced through thick dust, catching on the broken spines of chairs, collapsed shelves, the skeletal remains of furniture left to rot. I mapped the corridors as I moved, but the geometry made no sense. The stairwell I descended should have led to a single floor beneath ground level, yet I found at least 3. My steps echoed endlessly, as though the halls were larger inside than the building's shell could contain. In the south wing, I found a door bricked shut. Scratches etched into the mortar clawed toward the edges, as though someone inside had tried to escape. Farther along, another door opened to a narrow stairwell spiraling down into a shaft of darkness. My light revealed steps slick with condensation, descending far deeper than the institution's foundation should have allowed. The basement gave way to something older. Catacomb-like corridors lined with stone arches curved away into impossible angles. I ran my hand along the walls and felt not plaster, but carved limestone, damp and pulsing faintly with warmth. Then came the first chamber. Photographs littered the floor, warped and curling, their images smudged with moisture. Faces of children stared out, eyes blacked over with ink, mouths sealed by thick strokes of pen. Beside them lay journals, their covers mottled with mold. I opened one carefully. Day 46, silence maintained. Opiates administered to resistant pupils. Correction successful in 3 of 6. Another, day 103, chambers flooded for deprivation exercise. No light, no sound, no name. The handwriting was Calder's. Cold, deliberate. Candles were arranged in a circle around the chamber, long since melted into brittle stubs. Out of habit, I brushed one with my finger. It relit. No spark, no match, the wick simply glowed and caught fire, a thin flame trembling as though breathing. My light flickered with it, the battery straining. I left the candle burning and pressed on. In the second chamber, mirrors leaned against the walls. Their silvering had decayed into black streaks, but when I passed, my reflection did not move as it should. It lagged, a half-second behind, and in the delay its mouth formed words I could not hear. My own lips remained shut, but my reflection whispered on. I fled the room, heart pounding, every step echoing louder than the last. At the far end of the hall, I reached a locked iron gate. Through the bars, I saw a staircase descending into darkness, its bottom shrouded in mist. I leaned closer, and realized the mist was moving against gravity, rolling upward like breath exhaled from the earth itself. Pinned to the gate was a single photograph. It showed the twin boys again, but this time older, perhaps 16. Their faces were leaner, their eyes more hollow. Between them stood Calder, his hands on their shoulders. Beneath, in Calder's handwriting, the perfected must descend. My flashlight sputtered, and in the brief darkness, I heard it, the faint chorus of children's voices rising from below, layered, indistinct, speaking not words but the rhythm of a doctrine recited too many times. When the beam flared back to life, the mist was gone. The staircase was sealed by stone. But the photograph remained in my hand, though I had not touched it. I had convinced myself Saint Isidore's was an aberration, a grotesque pocket of corruption left to rot in the woods. But the evidence refused to stop at its gates. In one of the journals I'd found underground, a page had been glued shut. When I carefully pried it open, I discovered a map drawn in ink, its lines blurred but still legible. Saint Isidore's was marked with a cross. Around it, across Virginia and beyond, were 6 more marks, stretching into Maryland, Pennsylvania, even as far as Ohio. Each bore the same symbol I'd seen scrawled on the back of the twins' photograph, a circle divided cleanly in half, like a sun cut by shadow. I hunted down the names beside each mark. The Fairview Institute for Youth. Sacred Heart Reformatory. The Elmhurst Retreat. Harmless, even benevolent names, each accompanied by dates ranging from 1890 to 1952. Digging through state appropriations ledgers, I noticed identical line items across different counties, funds for disciplinary boarding and youth rehabilitation. The sums were generous, but the outcomes were the same as St. Isidore's: no alumni, no documented graduates, no paper trail of what became of those who entered. One ledger listed transfers between institutions. Next to a student's name, relocated per doctrine, 12 to 12. The name itself had been blacked out. The repetition of that number followed me like a pulse. At the National Archives, buried in a box of unprocessed diocesan correspondence, I found a thin folder marked simply, Order of the Fifth Veil. Inside were typed memos on onion skin paper. The doctrine must remain discreet. Uniformity ensures perfection. Institutions are to be considered outposts, each correcting a region. Those resistant are to be cycled until memory is broken. The letterhead bore the insignia, the bisected circle. But the document that chilled me most wasn't about transfers or funding. It was a genealogy chart. At first, it seemed like an ordinary family tree, branches of surnames spanning back into the 19th century. But when I traced the connections, my blood ran cold. Half the names had been erased, reduced to initials. The surviving lines, however, were unmistakable. They stretched forward to the present, linking founders, directors, clerical figures. And there, written in neat type, was my own surname. A great-grandfather listed as custodian. His brother as adjunct. both attached to St. Isidore's. I closed the file, but the words had already lodged in me. I was not outside this system. I was born into it. Worse still, I found proof it had not ended. In a government database, I stumbled across a 1978 zoning permit for a private, youth development center, outside Pittsburgh. The architectural plans showed an underground level not listed in the public file. Its blueprints mirrored the spiral staircases of St. Isidore's exactly. And in the margin of the architect's notes, faint but legible, ensure chambers conform to Vail standards. The rot was not confined to one building in Virginia. It spread outward, masked by charity and reform, operating in the blind spots of official oversight. Every ledger, every map, every erased name testified that this was systemic, a doctrine that metastasized across generations and geographies. I had thought I was unearthing history. Instead, I was tracing something alive, something that had never stopped correcting, erasing, perfecting. And if my own bloodline was bound to it, then my digging was not investigation. It was trespass. By the time I found the recording, I already knew the choice waiting for me. Every discovery had been a tightening noose, pulling me closer to something I could neither expose nor endure. The tape was unlabeled, stored among dozens of reels in the diocesan archive. Its magnetic hiss filled my headphones, and then, a voice. A child's voice, trembling but obedient. My name is not mine. Father says it will be given when I am ready. A pause. Then another voice, an adult, calm, clipped. Do you remember the name you had before? No. He said I don't need it. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. I tore the headphones off, bile rising in my throat. But I couldn't stop listening. The tape continued, documenting preparation, silence drills, restraints, whispered mantras repeated until the child's voice slurred into exhaustion. Then the last words, faint and broken, "Will it matter if I get out?" I sat frozen, hands clammy, staring at the reels stacked like coffins. That same day, I tracked down the only living testimony I could find. An elderly woman in a nursing home outside Richmond, listed in a case file under a pseudonym. When I asked her about St. Isidore's, her eyes filled with tears she didn't seem to understand. They took my name, she whispered. I used to be someone. I think I was 12. Or 13. He told me not to remember. Her hand gripped mine with desperate strength. You can write it down, you can shout it to the world, but it won't matter. They'll erase you, too. All I want, is not to vanish again. The words cut deeper than any archive. She didn't want justice. She wanted remembrance. That night, in the archives, I laid out everything I had, the ledgers, the maps, the journals, the genealogy that bound my family into the Order of the Fifth Veil. Exposing it all would tear open generations of complicity, names that had built schools, churches, charities. People who still wielded influence today. The fallout would be catastrophic. And yet burying it would mean betraying every vanished child whose voice still echoed in those damp halls. The candle I had carried from the underground chamber sat on the table beside me. Its wick was blackened, but when I struck a match, it flared alive instantly, too eager, as though it remembered. I stared at the flame, my breath shallow. The decision pressed harder than the darkness ever had. Expose everything, unleash chaos, stain my own bloodline, destroy families who never chose this inheritance. Or protect a few survivors, give them dignity in silence, and let the rest remain buried in stone and ash. The woman's voice rang in my ears, "Will it matter if I get out?" I gathered the reels of tape into a box, my hands trembling. I stacked the ledgers, the journals, the files. For one breathless moment, I thought I would seal them, label them, deliver them to every newsroom in the country. Instead, I struck another match. The paper caught instantly, flames curling around inked words and brittle pages. The genealogies blackened, the maps shriveled, the voices dissolved in smoke. The candle burned alongside them, its small flame steady as though approving. I locked the archive door behind me when I left. The box of ashes would remain, silent, hidden. Not justice. Not closure. But a kind of protection. I tell myself it was mercy. But as the smoke clung to my clothes and the woman's question lingered in my skull, I wondered if I had simply chosen the doctrine again, erasure disguised as salvation. The official report was brief. A fire had broken out in the Culpeper County archives just past midnight. Faulty wiring in the sub-basement was blamed. The clerk on duty had gone home early, no one was injured. By morning, the building was sealed with caution tape, and the local paper ran a 3-paragraph obituary for the loss of priceless county history. They called it an accident. Electrical failure. Nothing to investigate. When I returned days later, the air still smelled of smoke, sharp and acrid. Entire shelves had been reduced to ash, the heat so intense it fused metal filing cabinets into warped, unopenable coffins. The fire department claimed no recoverable contents remained. But that was not true. I stepped carefully over the blackened rubble, the silence of the place deeper than ever. In the ruins of the sub-basement, where the ledgers had been stored, I found fragments of paper, unreadable, charred into lace. Bones too, brittle and gray, scattered where boxes had once stood. The report would say they belonged to small animals trapped in the walls. But they were not animals. Some still bore the unmistakable curve of a child's jaw, the frail length of tiny phalanges. And then I saw it, something spared, impossibly intact. A small locket, its silver surface blackened but unbroken, half buried in soot. I pried it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a faded photograph of 2 boys, the twins again, their expressions hollow, their gaze unblinking. On the opposite side, etched so faintly I had to tilt it into the light, were the numbers, 12 to 12. The firefighters had overlooked it. Or perhaps it had been left. The county soon declared the building structurally unsound and ordered its demolition. Nothing of value survived, the press release said. The past preserved in memory alone. But memory was the very thing St. Isidore's devoured. Records erased, names overwritten, bones misplaced, histories misfiled. The past they promised to protect had been fed once more into silence, into the doctrine's eternal hunger. I did not speak at the hearings. I did not tell them what I'd seen, what I had burned myself. My silence became part of the record, just another line of omission written into the archive of forgetting. Yet the locket remains with me. I keep it in a drawer I cannot bring myself to open, its weight pressing against my chest even when it's hidden. At night, sometimes, I hear it click softly, as though it opens on its own. I wasn't supposed to find this. And yet, I did. And by finding it, I carried it forward, whether I chose to or not. The doctrine was never just their system. It is memory itself, the constant pressure to erase what cannot be endured. When I close my eyes, I see the boys again, always the same photo, always the same gaze. And in the stillness between heartbeats, I hear their whisper, patient and damning, too.